Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy Ng. I'm a high school educator working as a spiritual life animator and a social studies teacher. Previous to that, I've also worked for the Canadian House of Commons, an international charity, as well as the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. I've also had the privilege of traveling to close to 40 countries on 5 continents, sometimes for work, other times for personal discovery, including one trip by motorcycle from here in Montreal all the way to Ushuaia at the very southern tip of Argentina. I've experienced the world in wonderful ways, both personally and professionally, and I'm most grateful for the friendships that have shaped my worldviews today. But my roots are also affected, let's say, by collective and intergenerational trauma. I'm also the son and the grandson of genocide survivors and victims, war refugees from Cambodia who fled here to Canada in the early 1980s. But these roots, both inherited and my own, these roots have made me who I am today. A strong believer in the importance of civic engagement, the power and the importance of civic engagement. As we come out of this pandemic, we are challenged to find how to reconnect with our communities once again, and perhaps in more meaningful ways. So today, I would like to talk to you about the importance of learning and relating to social issues, as well as how we can better support one another in order to overcome all of the challenges that we have. I would like to talk to you today about the idea of the story of how we become more engaged in our communities, about how civic engagement is important. And to me, the story of us is also, from a civic engagement perspective, the story of how we do 3 things. The first one is about how we learn about social issues. The second one is how we relate to each other. And the third one is how we support one another. To give you a bit more details, I think that we really learn about, when we learn about social issues, we're really learning about each other. If we think of something that we've experienced collectively over the last few years, I think that the first one that comes to our mind is certainly the coronavirus. Now, the virus has brought all kinds of challenges, but it has also brought an opportunity for us to better understand how interdependent and how interconnected we are. We can see and learn that collective issues require collective responses, that we all need to make sacrifices in order to overcome the pandemic, as we have to a certain extent. Now, not only during this pandemic did we go through the coronavirus, these last year has also brought into light other types of social issues. In 2020, with the murder of George Floyd in the United States, we saw that a lot of light was shed on the fact that a lot of racism and discrimination was still part of our society. And we understood then that we had more work to be done. Last year, you may have also come across the news about the 215 children that were found in unmarked graves in Kamloops, BC. Another collective issue that came to our awareness and that brought more light into the importance of acknowledging the impacts of residential schools over many generations of Indigenous families, but also to our own culture here in Canada. And very recently, you probably have seen, as we do every day in the news, the situation in Ukraine, where now over 4 million people are displaced out of Ukraine or refugees. We've seen Canada's response, and we've also learned that the largest Ukrainian community outside of Ukraine and Russia is actually right here in Canada. So the first part of civic engagement is really finding the strength and courage to learn about these issues. because like the coronavirus, the virus requires collective responses. And so all of these other issues can only be solved if we also respond collectively. So it starts with learning about collective issues. And then it's also important to relate, but not just to relate to ideas and concepts and events, but to relate with each other. And one of the ways that we relate very much is through social media, or through different platforms that we use to communicate with each other, as well as face-to-face like we're doing here today. Now, the important thing about relation is that we often forget about it. We go from finding out about the news and events to wanting to do something about it right away, without first trying to connect emotionally with each other, with people who are affected by these issues. So it's important to first learn about an issue, but then also to relate to the people who are experiencing it. Now, the part I really want to get to with you today is the idea of how do we support each other. And in my experience, I found that it's useful to distinguish between two types of ways that we can support each other. One of them I would call performatively, which is to say that doing things where we are directly in the spotlight. Oftentimes it means bringing awareness to an issue. It means talking about an issue. Another way is transformatively, which is about looking more at what's the impact of what we're doing and not just talking about it. Now, an example that I find useful for myself to better understand this distinction is looking at indigenous issues here in Canada. You may have heard about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened between 2008 and 2015, where over 7,000 testimonies were listened to across Canada of former residential school survivors. Now, if you look at it from the perspective I just shared, we could understand that ultimately performative types of engagement allow the truth to come out. Because when everybody talks about what they've experienced, instead of keeping it a secret, instead of keeping it in shame, it allows the truth to come out. Now, some people were cynical in saying that all you did was talk and all you did was listen, nothing changed for people. And it wanted more action, wanted more investments. And that's also legitimate. But my understanding is that both are necessary. Oftentimes, performative actions aren't enough, but they are essential. And without them, we cannot have transformative actions, and therefore reconciliation. So my proposal is to understand performative action as being about bringing about the truth of a situation, bringing acknowledgement of a situation, while transformative action brings reconciliation in the case of Indigenous challenges. If we look more specifically at examples to understand this, we can think of performative actions that we're much familiar with, like changing Facebook profiles or frames. I'm sure many of us have done it, whether it's for the Ukraine cause or in this case for Indigenous causes. What's important is for us to understand that this is an important action. That through this, it raises awareness. When you associate yourself with a cause, you're bringing light to that cause. And without growing awareness, we cannot get to a transformative action. We've also seen people go to protests or use public art demonstration or installations to bring more awareness, to bring the causes outside of the internet and into the real world. And that's also very important, because then people who are walking by who have no idea can learn about the issue as well. And to me, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has really been a bridge between these two types of actions. On the one hand, we listen to people, and on the other hand, we also understand that there's power in listening. Now, examples of transformative actions, those very same audiences where people were able to share their experiences was extremely healing for many residential school survivors. Being able to share something that you experience and feel that you're not alone can be extremely healing. So that's an example of a transformative action. Another one that I want to highlight is the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, which a few years ago traveled all the way to northern Quebec in order to co-create a performance with traditional Inuit throat singing. When they went there to first listen, to understand the tones of throat singing, And it's over several weeks that they work together to create a common performance, putting both classical music and traditional throat singing on equal par value. Another initiative that we've seen recently was the appointment of Mary Simon as the first ever Indigenous Governor General. She now represents the very government that implemented the residential school policies. Imagine how transformative that can be when you compare just a couple of decades of differences. And finally, earlier this month, you may have heard about the former apologies of Pope Francis to a delegation of representatives from the Indigenous communities across Canada. These are ways in which performative and transformative actions complete each other. Now, going back to civic engagement, my idea really is to say that civic engagement is really an iterative process, which is to say that it's a journey that has a beginning and a middle part, and more or less an end, really. And in order to share the model that I've developed with you, I want to first do a check-in on systems thinking. For those who are not familiar with systems thinking, I wanted to share a definition that I really appreciate by Peter Senge, who's a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. In his definition, he says that systems thinking is a discipline for seeing wholes rather than parts, for seeing patterns of change rather than static snapshots, and for understanding the subtle interconnectedness that gives living systems their unique character. Now, how does that translate into the model that I've developed? In the following way. I want to propose to you a systemic approach, but to civic engagement, which begins with acknowledging that the very, very first step to any journey towards civic engagement is simply acknowledging that we're unaware of many issues. And that when we begin as unaware of an issue, it's most likely that we're also going to be inactive about that issue, and even oftentimes indifferent. So I know that growing up, I never heard about residential schools. It wasn't taught in my schools. So I didn't know what residential schools were. And to a certain extent, I probably didn't care because I didn't know that it existed. But then as more coverage surfaced, as more stories surfaced, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission shed light on that reality, awareness grew. And all of a sudden, it was both a surprise and a shock. And as human beings, when we're under that shock, one of our reflexes is wanting to do something. So oftentimes, the first reflex when you begin to learn about an issue is to want to do something right here, right now. You want to do anything except being idle. So usually, the action is performative. You're going to change your profile picture. You're going to write a post. You're going to put a certain flag out. And that's very important because that's how you learn to connect with the issue. But oftentimes what happens is that as we do performative acts, we realize that they don't have necessarily the measurable impact that we want. And that's where we go from simply being aware to being self-aware, to understanding that it's not enough for me to want to do something about it. I also need to do it in a way that's coordinated, that is with other people. So the key to self-awareness is that it brings along the idea of dialogue, of working with other people, and especially the importance of relating with other people and relating to those who are affected by the very issue. It's very important to understand that at the awareness level, you can simply interact with the concepts, with the ideas, with the events intellectually. But at the self-awareness level, that's when you've connected relationally with your heart to other people. And only then can we bring about transformative actions, because transformative actions always involves the people who are concerned. If you're doing something for someone, but you didn't ask them about it, you didn't ask them to know whether they wanted your help, it might be more performative than transformative. And as we do transformative actions, that's how we build a consciousness shift among each other. As more and more people are brought in or involved, that's where people from different backgrounds, from different ages can come together and really bring about a consciousness shift where we understand that we are in this together. And finally, with a consciousness shift, when we have a critical mass, we can hope for systemic change, which means bringing about changes both in the culture, creating new cultures, and also creating more equitable structures. the important thing I want you to remember about this model is the importance of relating with people. Understanding that we're all different in our journeys, that if you're meeting someone who's still unaware about an issue, just try to get them to become aware before asking them to do something about it. And if someone is just learning about an issue, perhaps a performative action is more suited for them, and so on and so forth. And it's, as we have more people who are aware, then we can transition towards more transformative forms of action. That's basically what I wanted to share with you today. 3 things: the importance of learning about social issues, the importance of relating with each other around them, and the importance of supporting each other, whether it's performatively or transformatively. They are both necessary, and what's important is for us to have range in how we support each other, and that we can adapt to where people are at in their journey and meeting them where they're at. I hope this has been useful and that you've enjoyed the conversation, and that you'll be able to use this for your own connections with your communities and the world. Thank you for your attention.